I never thought I'd see my short-legged bulldog Chowder gliding down the street on a skateboard, his tongue flapping and ears bouncing with every push. It was a sunny afternoon on the beach when this wild journey began, the waves crashing softly as my daughter and I soaked in the salty air. But then, a kid tossed a skimboard into the shallow water, and before I could react, Chowder bolted, leapt onto it, and rode it like he was born for it. My daughter and I stood there, stunned, watching him balance with pure joy, as if he'd found his calling right there in the surf. My daughter, Lily, burst into giggles, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Dad, is he really skateboarding?" she asked, her voice a mix of awe and amusement. I laughed, still processing what I'd just seen. "I don't know, kiddo, but he's definitely got something special going on." The spark in Chowder's eyes as he glided across that skimboard wasn't just a one-off. It was like he'd unlocked a hidden part of himself. His stubby legs, usually a source of his waddling charm, seemed to find new purpose in that moment. I turned to Lily, half joking. "What if he's into skateboarding?" Her laughter rang out, but the idea lingered. Chowder looked more alive than I'd ever seen him, like he'd discovered his true calling in the shallow waves. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. I rummaged through the garage and found an old skateboard, a relic from my teenage years. It was narrow, scratched, and a bit wobbly from years of neglect, but it would have to do. I set it down in the driveway, unsure if Chowder would even recognize it as something to ride. To my surprise, he didn't hesitate. He waddled over, sniffed the board, and hopped on, his belly pressed flat against the deck. With a gentle nudge from me, he started rolling, his ears flopping and his tongue dangling in a goofy grin. No fear, no wobbling, just pure, natural instinct. Neighbors passing by did a double take, their faces lighting up as they pointed at this fluffy bulldog cruising like a pro. "Is that your dog?" one called out, chuckling. I nodded, equally stunned. It was as if Chowder had been skating in secret for years. But that old board wasn't up to the task. Its narrow deck made it hard for Chowder to balance, and his short legs kept slipping off the edges, throwing him off mid-ride. Watching him struggle was tough. His enthusiasm never wavered, but I could see the frustration in his eyes as he scrambled back onto the board after each fall. He was so eager to ride, so determined, that I knew we needed something better. I spent hours online, researching skateboards designed for stability, wide decks, sturdy builds, perfect for a stocky bulldog with a low center of gravity. When the new board arrived, Chowder was practically vibrating with excitement. I barely had the box open before he was nudging it with his nose, his tail thumping like a metronome. I set the board down and he leapt on, gliding down the driveway with a confidence that made my heart swell. Lily clapped, jumping up and down. "He's doing it, Dad! Look at him go!" she shouted. It was like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. Over the next year, Chowder transformed into a skateboarding sensation. What began as a quirky beach moment evolved into a full-blown passion. He wasn't just riding anymore, he had style. He learned to lean into turns, his compact body swaying like a surfer carving a wave. His short legs, which I'd once thought might limit him, became his superpower. They gave him a low, stable base, allowing him to adjust to every bump and tilt with uncanny precision. Every morning, he'd plant himself by the front door, his eyes fixed on the street, his skateboard propped nearby. Rain or shine, he was ready to roll. If I was slow to grab the board, he'd drag his leash over, dropping it at my feet with an impatient huff, as if to say, "Let's go already." I'd laugh, ruffle his ears, and say, "All right, buddy, let's hit the pavement." But life doesn't always cooperate with passion. Some days I'd be swamped with work or errands, and I'd have to tell Chowder we couldn't go out. He'd sit by the door, his big brown eyes watching the street longingly, his board untouched. It broke my heart to see him wait, his patience both humbling and inspiring. He never whined or sulked, just sat there, hopeful, trusting we'd get back to it soon. On those days, I'd try to make it up to him, sneaking in a quick ride in the evening or setting up a ramp in the backyard. The moment he hopped on, his whole demeanor changed. His stubby tail would wag furiously, and he'd glide with that same joyful grin, like every ride was the best ride of his life. Chowder wasn't like other dogs. He didn't care for lounging on the couch or begging for belly rubs. His joy was in motion, in the feeling of the board beneath him as he zipped down the street. When he was skating, he was free, alive, like he was declaring to the world, "This is who I am." I started taking him to local parks and skate parks where he quickly became a local legend. People would whip out their phones, filming as he cruised by, some clapping, others asking if he was part of a stunt show. "Is that dog for real?" one kid asked, wide-eyed. I'd just smile and say, "He's just doing his thing." Chowder didn't care about the attention. He wasn't skating for the crowds or the cameras. He was skating because it was what he loved. Of course, it wasn't always smooth sailing. Some days the weather was brutal, pouring rain or scorching heat, and I'd have to tell him we couldn't go out. He'd sit by his board giving me this stubborn look like, "You're really gonna make me wait?" I'd feel a pang of guilt knowing how much he lived for those rides. So I'd get creative, setting up indoor ramps in the garage or sneaking in short sessions when the weather cleared. Each time he'd bound onto the board with the same enthusiasm, as if every ride was a fresh adventure. Those moments reminded me how much joy he brought to our family. He wasn't just a pet, he was our spark, our reminder to find joy in the little things. One afternoon at the skate park, a skater with a beanie and a board tucked under his arm watched Chowder nail a smooth turn. He grinned and said, "That bulldog's got more soul than half the skaters here." I laughed, but he was spot on. Chowder's board wasn't just a piece of wood with wheels. It was an extension of his spirit. Every ride took me back to that day on the beach when he first leapt onto that skim board, his short legs powering him through the surf. It was a moment of pure magic, one that had changed our lives. But what hit me hardest was how Chowder inspired others. People who saw him skating left with smiles, some saying things like, "If a dog can do that, what's stopping me from chasing my dreams?" Without even trying, Chowder was teaching us all to pursue what makes us feel alive. At home, I'd often find him curled up next to his skateboard, his stubby paws resting on it like he was dreaming of his next ride. I'd tease, "Hey buddy, you can't take that to bed." And he'd give me this defiant look, daring me to try and take it away. Those quiet moments were just as special as the rides themselves. They reminded me how deeply he'd woven himself into our lives. Lily would sit with him sometimes, sketching him on his board, her pencil capturing the way his ears flopped as he leaned into a turn. "He's our superstar," she'd say, and I'd nod, knowing she was right. Chowder's journey wasn't just about skateboarding. It was about living with purpose. Every time he hopped on that board, he reminded us to chase what sets our hearts racing, to embrace the things that make us feel alive. People would ask me why Chowder was so special, and I'd just shrug and say, "He's not just skating, he's living." That was the heart of it. He was a bulldog with a passion, a reminder that joy can come from the most unexpected places. His short legs, his stubborn spirit, his unwavering love for the ride, they were all part of what made him ours. Thank you for watching Chowder's story. If you enjoyed it, feel free to comment, like, and subscribe. We'll see you in the next adventure.